greater and greater numbers, citizens groups the world over are using entrepreneurial vision and skills to solve some of the world's most difficult problems.
We've gone from 5,000 to over 1 million in Brazil in 20 years. In the U.S., we went from 464,000 in 1990 to 1.1 million a dozen years later.
Bill Drayton is the founder of Ashoka, Innovators for the Public, a global organization that stands at the vanguard of the emerging citizens sector. In this program, he describes the sector's rapid rise and its profound implications for everyone.
The companies that get this are going to have a huge competitive advantage. Those that fall behind are just going to be blindsided.
He shows how business people, social activists, teachers, and students can become part of this powerful new movement for social good.
Once in a very rare while in history, there is a fundamental pattern change. We're in the middle of one of those changes right now, and that's what Ashoka is here to serve. To understand it, one has to go back in history a little. Rome to 1700, no growth in per capita income. Then in the next century, 20%, the next century, 200%, and in the last century, 740% growth in per capita income in the West. Business took off around 1700 with a new architecture. Radical change. Anyone could start a new idea. They would gain market share if they succeeded, respect, money. Other people would copy them. A positive dynamic got underway. Business became entrepreneurial and competitive. That set in motion a compounding process of productivity growth. This didn't happen in the social sector. The money came through taxes, paid for the canals, schools, welfare system. Too easy, no pressure for change. Moreover, the money came through government, a series of monopolies, and no monopoly in any sector can tolerate competition because they lose. We didn't make the same transformation that the business half of society did. Business compounded productivity, we remained static, we fell behind. We are now at the midpoint of an incredibly quick catch-up transformation of the citizen half. The last 2.5 decades, all across the world pretty much, the sector has flipped to the same entrepreneurial competitive architecture that business has. As a result, we've been gaining productivity very fast. As in business, if you have a better idea, you will gain attention, resources, better people will come, you'll be better placed in the public decision-making process, you and your organization will move ahead. Others will then copy. You better keep inventing. Same dynamic as business. And because it's a catch-up, we didn't have to invent everything, so we've been catching up very fast. I think this is a guesstimate. Our productivity growth is probably 2.5, 3 times that of business for the last 2 decades. So we are, in other words, cutting the productivity gap in half every 10 to 12 years. When you do that, of course, resources flow into the sector. And that's what we've seen. The number of citizen groups has multiplied. We've gone from 5,000 to over 1 million in Brazil in 20 years. In the U.S., we went from 464,000 in 1990, recognized by the Internal Revenue Service, to 1.1 million a dozen years later. Slovakia went from 10 or 12 to 10,000 in 9 years once the wall came down. Employment rates growing at 2-3 times as fast in the countries where you can measure that. So this has been an extraordinary catch-up, a one-time change in the architecture of half of society. In any historical sense, this level, this depth of profound, broad change is unprecedented. we've just had this extraordinary transformation suddenly take place. Why did it suddenly take off around the late 70s, early 1980? Worldwide, not just in one place. I think there are a number of forces that came together. One, we have been multiplying problems very fast. The faster society develops, the more complicated it is, the more things that fall out of whack. And we have not been doing an equally good job of catching up. So there is a need for more innovation. We have to have more people on the job of problem solving. That's a simple demand issue. On the supply side, you have more people who are educated, more people who are urban, more people who are connected by communications, even people in small villages in India, more people who are self-confident. They didn't grow up as colonial people. They didn't suffer that trauma. And then the march of democracy in much of the world, that removed very major barriers. The generals did not allow this in Brazil. The Soviets didn't allow it in either Russia or their Central European colonies. So I think a whole series of things came together, are still coming together. And then, once the dynamic got started, it is so liberating. It's very contagious. The more examples you have, the more people say, well, if she can do that, I can do this. And the more that happens, the more the barriers fall. And so we're in a virtuous circle, driven by the fact that there's great need, people want to do this, this is totally, it fits human nature. "20 years ago, they used to say, oh, nice people, little work in this village, that neighborhood, a drop in the ocean." I can't tell you how sick I was of hearing that phrase. People don't say a drop in the ocean anymore because they know that we're too powerful. But the perception gap between what people perceive and where we already are, let alone where we will be in 3 or 5 years, is enormous, just enormous. And that's what happens when history moves really fast, and it always is moving on a plane different than the superficial events that are the crises of today. Instead of being the backwater, we're the most energized part of the world. People want to come once they realize this. You go to the business school, students know this is where it's at. This is very different when almost no business school students would even think of going into this area 2 decades ago. This is a wonderful career, big impact, engaging, working with colleagues who are value-driven. Now, let's imagine you're a government officer. You're running an agriculture department or an environment agency. If you don't understand that this change has taken place, you do not understand the actors that you have to deal with if you're going to be effective in your area of concern. They are going to hold you accountable. They're going to bring up new ideas. This is a huge opportunity for you if you know how to play with this new set of forces. Same thing for business. This 3 centuries of gliding apart, now you have a very large number of institutions that are just as entrepreneurial, as competitive as your business colleagues, as you are. They are catching up fast in terms of productivity. Well, that's a great opportunity. The strategic environment for government, for business, certainly for our sector, for those whose job it is to understand what's going on, journalists, scholars, radically changed, and now it's reached a level where you can't ignore it anymore. Ashoka operates on 3 different levels. Simultaneously, each reinforces the other. The first level, which we're known for chiefly, is that we try to find the very best social change ideas in the hands of the strongest entrepreneurs building strong institutions. We help them fly, and we help them succeed over their whole life history. Stipend to begin with, all the way through the colleagueship of the community. Key inputs from strategic partners, McKinsey, Hill & Knowlton, lawyers and others, as needed. The second level is how can we be much more than the sum of those solo practitioner parts? The most dramatic example, the most powerful single example of that is our learning as a profession how to entrepreneur together. We can see a big idea and we can move on it. We can actually together change the whole field. The third level is the meta level of how do we get the patterns and the institutions for our field as a whole right. We've now been building up this change. We've reached a scale, a size, a momentum. Vast number of citizen groups, sophisticated, highly competitive. Now they are going to find ways, there are going to be patterns of how this all fits together. The only question is how smart will those patterns be? Can we help this field crystallize so it is an integrated field globally? Overcoming all the national laws, all the patterns that divide us. So that's the third level. How do we launch the best ideas in people and help them succeed over their whole career? How do we be much more than the sum of the parts? And how do we get the institutions, the patterns for the field as a whole right now so that 50 years, 100 years from now, the field will be well served? When you think about business and society, it was easy to see the difference in the past. They didn't speak the same language. One was entrepreneurial, one wasn't. One was competitive, the other wasn't. One was highly productive and getting more and more so and generating huge wealth. Not true of the other. It is a complete shock to people in business. The idea that citizen sector organizations are entrepreneurial, competitive, and now they're getting to be as productive, and they are a key part of your new strategic environment. Instead of having two halves that don't talk, they're now coming together. And there's a whole series of opportunities, very important opportunities. The companies that get this and take advantage of it and get ahead of it are going to have a huge competitive advantage. Those that fall behind are just going to be blindsided. But everyone's going to have to change. And the social side's going to have to change. As the two come together, we're going to have a merger of an ending of this stupid accidental division that took place over the last 3 centuries. Once you understand that, then you've got to figure out who are these people and what motivates them. And very importantly, ultimately, what are the deals where you can bring the two halves together? What are markets that you can't reach? Well, maybe citizen groups are in a better position to reach them because they have a lower cost structure, because they know these people better. Ashoka has a program, one of many. There actually have 14 business social bridge programs designed to help this process. And I'm just giving you an example of one. We call it the hybrid business social value-added chain. Every single citizen, client, customer, each sector has different language. Every person has been served by a business system and by a social system that haven't talked for several centuries. The result, of course, is wildly inefficient. Historically in Mexico, you couldn't get drip irrigation to small farmers. It wasn't economic given the cost structure of business. Suddenly you put in citizen organizations who take over key parts of the retail function, and you can get down to 1 hectare from 100. Well, this is a big difference for the small farmers. It's a big difference for the environment, for water conservation. It opens up a major new market for business, a major new source of revenue and way of serving their clients for the citizen sector. Everybody wins, because this is a fundamental restructuring. It's an ending of this stupid business social division and figuring out how to put them together. The company that is doing this with us in Mexico is getting a giant new market that its competitors have not even heard of yet. That is but one tiny example of what I mean that the strategic environment has changed. The business entrepreneurs and the social entrepreneurs are increasingly playing on a level playing field. And in fact, some of the most interesting entrepreneurial opportunities for both sides is where they meet. And so on the business side, you have a Pierre Omijar and Jeff Skoll who invent eBay. Why did they succeed? Because they were trying to build community. They were trying to build a perfect economic democracy for millions of people around the world. That sounds like a social goal. Well, of course it is. And that's why they succeeded at business. And you have social entrepreneurs who are very effective at business because it serves the goal that they are pursuing. Now, where is this headed? By working together, we can do things that neither of us could do. Citizen group cannot produce easily in an economic way, drip irrigation systems. We're not into manufacturing. That's not one of our core strengths. We don't have as good access to finance. On the other hand, we know the clients. We know the environment. We can help structure savings. You put these two together, everyone is better off. So I think practically we're going to have a merger of an ending of the division that took place over the last 3 centuries. Things are going to merge because it's going to be logical. You take this piece and you put this piece, you work together, suddenly it's business social. And you can't say it's one or the other anymore. There will be differences, there will be spectra, but there's not going to be this business versus social. It will close that gap. People will move easily between the sectors. Much more productive, much fairer, healthier world. Let me just give you a couple of different examples to give you a feel of the possibilities. You think about any problem, America is not that different from everyone else. As in most countries, we do not have enough health professionals, especially in areas like mental health, to provide really good care for everyone. We're not doing it. We have social entrepreneurs in Mexico, Brazil, India, and elsewhere who figured out how neighbors and families, non-professionals, can play a central role dealing with maybe even 70% of acute mental illness. Well, that could change the pattern here. You think about education. Well, business is moving into education. It's whether at the university level or technical training or preschool. So is the citizen sector. They have head-on competition, and that's a very good thing. That opens up a whole series of new possibilities, new ideas. We're overdue for a period of innovation in education, and it's starting. And it's coming from those two sources. Practically, as we go through this transition, you start off with the most amazing stereotypes. The business people think the social people are absolutely impractical, fuzzy-wuzzy, do-goods, do-nothings. Some of the people on the social side say, these people don't care about anything, insensitive. That's part of the reality we've inherited. And, it's regrettable, but there it is. One of the great advantages that Ashoka has is that we are dealing with entrepreneurs. Entrepreneurs blow up old categories as a profession. They just get in the way. A wonderful 70-some-odd-year-old man who was the founder of Merit Oil Company, Mort Sand. He became an Ashoka business entrepreneur's partner, an entrepreneur member. I remember introducing him to a very young Mexican from a large Indian ethnic family. He needed to figure out how to market coffee in the U.S. as part of breaking the Mexican government marketing monopoly. So we introduced these two. What was supposed to be a tea, at 11 o'clock at night after we had missed the last train, these two people were still going at it. because they had discovered that they were entrepreneurs. They ask a question, they get the sort of answer that they wish they could get from 99% of the rest of the world. And they liked one another. Now, this doesn't happen in every case, but the fact is that entrepreneurs, whether they're business or social, have much more in common with one another than they do with the routine managers and other organizations, even in their own industry, let alone the sector. So there is a natural bridge between business and social entrepreneurs. So that makes it easy for us. Universities have a very big role to play here on many dimensions. And it's not just one part of the universities. The business schools have gotten out ahead of this, not surprisingly, but everything from history to medicine, faculty to students. This is a very, very important opportunity. Any person whose job it is to explain the world, whether it's to students or through their research in their field, or to a broader audience, journalists as well as scholars, if they don't understand this profound change in the architecture of the world and all its implications, how can they do a good job? How can you be a good scholar of history if you don't understand this? How can you understand the pressures, the opportunities that are going to drive the law if you don't understand this? One of the biggest groups of entrepreneurs coming up now is in what we call the law for all area. How can you make sure that there are police and dispute resolution serving everyone, which is not the case for much of the world? That makes everyone a real citizen. That's incredibly powerful. One of the Ashoka Fellows in the Czech Republic, Petra, has opened up the entire prosecutorial and court system by getting the legislature to pass victims' rights, everything from commercial fraud to rape. Now, what that means is that the land of Kafka that has been ruled by the communists, by the Germans, by the Russians, where the legal system, shall we say, has been somewhat less than open, suddenly is open. This is a big change. You can't understand what is happening in the law, the policy pressures, the structural pressures, if you don't understand this. Well, we could go through every subject matter, and the same thing would be true. Education, well, where is the main innovation coming from? Of course, it's coming from the citizen sector. For research, for scholarship, it's just very important, and in all fields. If I were the dean of a business school right now, I would see both great opportunity and great risk. There's a whole series of major challenges that need to be attacked, that business schools are in a great place to attack. We've got to develop a new social financial services industry. Well, that's something that business school faculties could research. What models are working? How's this coming? What can we learn from the business financial industry that might apply here? There's yet another reason that if I were a business school dean, I would say this is something I've got to focus on. This is the fastest growing area of society. This is where the big institutions are now growing. This is where the entrepreneurial opportunities are more than anywhere else because it's of the fast growth and change. This is where society needs my graduates. This is a great opportunity for a business school, and it's also a risk if the business school falls behind this curve. When you look at any field of endeavor, you can ask what type of institutions are at work. And in the development field, so-called development, you have the old line government institutions, and they operate as they always have operated. And what you now have as well is a very large number of citizen groups that are very different. Their architecture is different, their spirit is different, and so there is an increasing choice. There's an increasing competition, an increasing ability of each to hold the other accountable. And so we have a dynamic now which is much improved. It has a long way to go. I think much of the government effort has still got an obsolete product line with an obsolete strategy and politics and institutional arrangements. We're beginning to see some movements to reform that. And where does it come from? It comes in large part from recognizing that you can really do the job a lot better, a lot more nimbly. One of the Ashoka Academy members, Fazl Abed, has demonstrated that on a very large scale in Bangladesh, he can take the poorest students and give them a better education at a fraction of the cost of the government schools. Well, that says something, and it's a challenge. It'll make some people uncomfortable, but it's opening up education to millions of children that wouldn't have it otherwise. And so, it's a very healthy dynamic, and I think where we'll end up is that the government half of this picture will perform much better. What is the government's strength? Both business and the citizen sector are now competitive and entrepreneurial. They're not representative. No one elected either Florence Nightingale or Andrew Carnegie, or for that matter, Bill Gates or Mohammed Yunus. They outcompeted everyone else because they had the most powerful ideas, and they knew how to entrepreneur, to develop them, constantly improve them and change them and have them adapt as the world changes. But they aren't representative. That is the thing that government is uniquely well positioned to do, to represent everyone, to make sure that how the game is played between all these very vigorous actors is done in a way that serves the whole society, and also is done in a way that's fair for everyone, specifically including the weak. All the actors need this. An efficiently operating society is one where you have this bubbling of energy. Everyone a change maker is Ashoka's core ultimate goal. Well, that could be anarchy if you didn't have a structure, and the structure is something that the government is uniquely well positioned to put in place. We're in a fascinating period of transition of government's role, and I believe we're going to end up with a representative government being stronger and more sophisticated and being much quicker and more nimble in how it constantly changes the incentives and safeguards. How do we work out our relationships with other parts of society? The most obvious question is between business and the citizen half. Now we're closing the gap, but inertia still has us drifting apart, not liking one another, sort of vaguely spitting at one another. Now, many people are beyond that, but we've got to work really hard in the next couple of years to get the momentum going towards merger and stop this stupid division business. There's no guarantee that that's going to happen. That's going to take really hard work. How do we build the right bridges between the citizen sector and the universities? You've got personality types at the outer extremes. People who choose to be scholars are happy living in the world of ideas. They don't have to do institutions. They don't have to serve clients. They don't have to change the whole society. But the entrepreneur, that's all they want. They can only be satisfied when they have changed the whole society. We have a structural problem that these two folks, sympathetic, no obvious conflicts, they just speak really different languages. Well, the students have the whole diversity of human temperaments, and there's very strong bridges that we can build there. Whenever we have a meeting of Ashoka Fellows and members, the number one problem, absolutely predictably, is we do not have a financial services structure that serves us well. It's a structural problem. As an entrepreneur, you need someone who wants, values new ideas, really new ideas. A government grant agency is set up by a statute to do a specific thing and nothing else. A foundation is set up and they develop a strategy, their strategy about what they think is important, agreed to. That is what they are willing to invest in. They never heard of your new idea. It doesn't fit. So you have a dysfunctional structural situation there. As an entrepreneur, you want to have people who will be comfortable with ideas that cut across disciplinary and organizational lines. That makes a mess of the statutory requirements or the strategies. Again, that doesn't fit. As an entrepreneur, you want someone to be loyal to you. This is your life. You're putting everything into it. This is not a project. This is not a one-year thing you're doing. This is your life. These people don't do that. They invest in projects, short-term. They don't invest in you as a person. That requires a type of judgment that's very difficult. So again, you have a structural misfit. Fourth, you need people to give you the funds so you can build an institution. That's overhead. We don't do that, or we do as little of that as possible. You need substantial funds for medium to long term because it takes a while to build an institution. It takes a longer while to cause major structural change. That's a time frame that is impossible for the one-year budget cycle of the government agency and all the politics surrounding it. It's not what foundations do either. There is nothing that fits. We need to have entrepreneurship at work to invent new financial service institutions that will serve social entrepreneurs. We're putting in place a series of programs that are designed to speed this process up. One of them is a program to encourage the for-profit leading financial institutions to come into this sector. And when you want change, you've got to ask, who are the actors? In the financial world, it's the financial industry. They take the initiative. There's a set of people who want to invest in all sorts of different ways. There's a whole set of different possible investments. The job of the finance industry is to match those. And they know they've got a whole bunch of clients who would like to invest, who would like to become engaged. Our job is to trigger that dynamic. Now, I'll just give you an example of how some of these pieces fit together. We're helping a series of business social production and distribution systems come into place. Every one of those is an investment opportunity. If we can show how piping companies can sell lower than 100 hectares down to 1 hectare in terms of drip irrigation, well, the citizen groups, we've got 5 citizen groups involved in this right now. They have to have a certain amount of capital to get started before they have revenue. This is a financing need. Well, that's interesting. It's social return, it's business return. There may be possibilities for this person to learn about the sector, for their children to get exposure, for their businesses to become involved, because this is business social bridging. Well, if we can get 2, 3 of the leading competitive for-profit financial institutions to really taste what it is to provide this set of services, we've got it. That's an example of working on the institutional side. The biggest part of the problem is, especially outside the U.S., how can we get the citizen sector to develop a broad citizen or grassroots base of support? Money, people, information in and out. That is just like business. You go from garage, institutional support, break-even zone, and then you've got to have a base of income of all these different sorts, at least equal to the costs ongoing. Otherwise, you don't have a viable institution. Same deal as business. There are huge opportunities here. And so we have a program called the Citizen Base Initiative that is designed to flip the thinking in our sector because that's where the barrier is. We run a competition open to any citizen group in a country, Brazil, Thailand, South Africa, whatever. They have to come with a plan. Here is how we would build a citizen base for our organization. We get to know them, we help refine the plan, we select a small number, 10, say, and we invest in half the salary for someone to implement that plan. They have to invest the other half. We help in a whole series of other ways, pro bono marketing skills, etc. The goal is, after 4 or 5 years, to have 50, 60, 70 groups that have succeeded. They have tasted the power of being independent. They're not going to stop. They're going to keep going. But there's so many different examples of how one does this. There's almost no limit to creativity once you sit down and figure out that you've got to do it. There's a women's group in Nepal that goes to a family and says, would you like to honor a woman in your family? We'll help you put together a special one-issue magazine. You'll write about her contribution. We'll help you get advertisements from the local stores. This is programmatic. It helps families think about roles and appreciate what women are doing. It also recruits volunteers. They make some profits on this. So they're both doing the program and building a citizen base. Mohammed Yunus and the Grameen Bank. He has now developed a whole series of businesses. Grameen Telephone is the one that's best known, biggest cell phone company in South Asia, built up in the last 4 years. It serves his programmatic purpose because the cell phone company provides thousands of jobs for very poor women. They borrow to buy a cell phone, they rent the use of the cell phone, they make a profit. He has a very low-cost retail distribution system. The phone company makes oodles of money, $50, $60 million, and he's been able to retire the bank's debt by doing that. Well, that's a business example. And every organization is going to have to figure out what's right for them, which particular group of people care enough about what we do. If there's no group of people who care enough, maybe there's a problem. Maybe we don't have a viable strategy. And so you've got to understand in general that to be viable, you've got to build a broad citizen or grassroots base of support. But then you've got to sit down, your organization, and figure out, just as every business does, who are the people that are my real clients? And then there's got to be a two-way flow of benefit between you and those clients. Otherwise, it's not viable. Right now, we have a big challenge. The field has reached this level of maturity and energy and spirit. It is going to crystallize in the next 5 years or so. We have an opportunity, Ashoka and the other institutions working on this, to make that crystallization be smarter. Are we going to be a globally operationally integrated field or not? Makes a huge difference to our efficacy and also to whether or not the world comes together. So how do we go about building a globally integrated field? Well, we have a great advantage that the problems we're trying to solve can't be solved at the local or national level. So this is not us just dreaming something. This is a strategic need, and the dynamics of the field are headed in the right direction. But that's not a guarantee. The inertia of laws and attitudes are a big barrier. So we have a whole series of approaches that are designed to help this process in the right direction. Ashoka is a global organization itself. We are completely committed to being a globally integrated organization. That has required considerable effort. Every time we set up in a country, we have to set up in a particular way so that it is not some separate group, but it's a part of our budget, our personnel, our legal system. It's decentralized in terms of initiative, integrated in terms of positive work, and in terms of structure. So we have created an institution that is absolutely committed to this goal and is now solid. And every year it gets more solid because there are more gravitational forces pulling together because the value of our collaborations with one another is getting greater. If we trust one another and we have a pattern of working together and we have the institutions that make that easy and routine and understandable, then the world is together in a very significant degree, both because of who we are, but also because our work then is constantly weaving the world together. It's an incredibly interesting time. How do we solve the management challenges within our sector? How do we work together? How do we have the routinized processes that, for example, allows us to entrepreneur together, a step beyond the solo practitionership? How do we work out how we really can work most productively with the other parts of society? How can we be true institutionally to the values we really have to care about? How do we build ourselves as a globally integrated field in a world that tries to divide you when it's essential for our work to be globally integrated? So that's another reason the Ashoka is so important. You need to have an institution built of the most thoughtful, cutting-edge people working on those issues, thinking about them, testing them, coming up with strategies, and then pressing them. And that's a very key part of what we're about.
Bill Drayton is the founder of Ashoka, Innovators for the Public. Ashoka works at the forefront of the rapidly growing field of social entrepreneurship. It supports the work of entrepreneurs worldwide who solve social problems in far-reaching, pattern-changing ways.
Our job is not to give people fish. It's not to teach them how to fish. It's to build a new and better fishing industry.
From modest beginnings in the early 1980s, Ashoka has grown into a community of over 1,500 fellows, supported by staff members, partners, and volunteers in over 50 countries.
88% of the people we elect at the end of 5 years have had other institutions copy their ideas. 59% have achieved national policy impact, and on average, they're serving 174,000 people.
Bill Drayton has been a social entrepreneur all his life. He shares his story to provide insights into what it takes to create widespread social change.
The development of Ashoka is very typical of the development of any major entrepreneurial venture. The idea, of course, dates back at least to the time I was an undergraduate. There was the challenge that came very sharp once I'd been in India. You must close this north-south gap. You must speed up development, democracy in the world. So there are many things that were very clear, but something was missing, and that was that the historical moment wasn't ripe, and also in our personal lives it wasn't ripe. We needed to go through our apprenticeship. I had to spend time at McKinsey learning how the world works, learning the key skills of how you cause change. Then, as I was at EPA, we sensed that the historical moment was coming. You could hear the hinge creaking. And what we were seeing very personally was that our friends, my friends in India and elsewhere, were starting to be social entrepreneurs. And what was happening was that the post-independence generation in Asia was coming of professional age. They were now in their 30s. Their parents thought getting control of the government, take over those instruments, that was the focus. The next generation grew in an environment with these overpowering government institutions, and some of them felt they could do better. And so you could see the beginning of a very significant wave of social entrepreneurs who were having a very difficult time. No word to describe the field, no support institutions, a lot of doubt ranging from their family to the government. We said, oh, this looks like this is the time. Then we asked, all right, well, how do we intervene? Where can you intervene which will have the biggest possible impact with very modest resources, all we could imagine available to us at the time? And that is the moment when a person and an idea have finished their apprenticeship, And they know, the person, the entrepreneur knows that they have an idea that is the next big generic step for their field. Then all you want to do is go full-time and run with this idea. Seize the historical moment. But who are you? What is this idea? It doesn't fit any of the existing patterns because they were set up to serve the old idea. At that point, a little bit makes all the difference. Very little money, so you can look your family in the eye and say, I know it's crazy to leave my tenured job in a nice, safe institution. You've got to be able to look them in the eye and say, I'm going to do this. And we give you the financial ability to do that if you need it. But beyond that, you now are a part of a family of your peers, and your uncle can see that these people that are very respected in your society and internationally think your work is important, believe in you. The early years of Ashoka, as for almost all our fellows, raising money was a nightmare. No funding from any institutional foundation for our first 6 years. Basically, the Klingenstein, Lipkin, and Golden families, that was it. And I was working part-time at McKinsey, commuting to New York. Ashoka was going, and it was a very crazy time. And that overload is what made the MacArthur sudden phone call in November of 1984, miraculous. The MacArthur Foundation had chosen me to be one of its fellows, which gave me 5 years income, and also, very importantly, for people who could not understand what Ashoka was about, gave me a sort of vaguely reputable category to fit into. It was a very key, liberating moment. I was able to go on leave from McKinsey, which I'm still technically on leave.
Ashoka, Innovators for the Public, is a global organization that searches out and supports social entrepreneurs, men and women who use entrepreneurial vision and skills to attack and solve social problems.
We're only talking about people who cannot come to rest until their vision has become the new pattern society-wide.
Ashoka is a community of over 1,500 social entrepreneurs, plus staff members, partners, and volunteers in over 50 countries who work together to create widespread, long-lasting change. Bill Drayton is its founder.
You got to have a vision that's going to change the field. You've got to be equally concerned with the how-tos. How do you get from here to there?
In this program, Bill Drayton describes how social entrepreneurs think and act, how the burgeoning field of social entrepreneurship is making a profound impact on millions of lives, and how everyone can contribute to its growth.
The entrepreneur and the idea are so closely tied together that the life cycle of an idea and the entrepreneur is very hard to separate. Now, of course, an entrepreneur can live beyond the launch of an idea. Similarly, the idea can live long after the entrepreneur. Jean Monnet, I think, was the second most brilliant person of the last century. He was responsible for the unification of Europe. His basic dynamic in Europe, idea, institution, stronger idea, next institution, more momentum and credibility for the idea. He died in 1979. That dynamic is still going on. And that's his core genius, in my mind, is setting that dynamic in place. So the person and the idea are married, but especially once you get beyond this stage of defining and figuring out how to make it work at scale, then they can have independent lives. One of the Ashoka Fellows in Brazil saw that half the people in a relatively rich state, Rio Grande do Sul, had no electricity in the rural areas. He wanted to change that. So he developed a new approach to rural electrification that cut the cost 70 to 90%, And then he went to work to change it. And he had to talk to the engineering firms and get financing structured and so on. That's changed the lives of way over 1 million people and spreading. He's now focusing on how do you get solar energy into the hands of people who are not wealthy. And there are hundreds of millions of people across the world who can benefit from that. J.B. Schramm, right here in Washington, was one of the first U.S. Ashoka Fellows. He has a very simple idea, but one that will have a big impact. He went to college. Most of his classmates didn't. That bothered him because he knew that they were just as smart, and he thought this was wrong, a big waste. He had parents who went to college. They didn't. This is not what should make the difference. Classic for an entrepreneur, he kept that idea in his mind's eye. He kept thinking about it, looking at it, feeling his way to an answer. He had to find an answer that would be low cost and simple and a big win for all the actors. Classic entrepreneur's criteria. He set up something called College Summit. The way it works, he takes a peer group of high school students from families that do not have college backgrounds, and they spend 4 or 5 days at a college summit on a nearby campus. College is demystified. They're challenged from the first moment to think about their lives, to articulate the strengths of what they've done, to write the essays for getting into college. They're talking with people who are role models. He then works with the homeroom teachers. Now, this works. 80% of the kids go, 80% graduate. Now, this is a very simple idea, but it has to be implemented. And he's now at the stage of moving it out across the country. That's a social entrepreneur at work.
Grameen Bank is best known for bringing the power of microfinance to over 4 million poor women in Bangladesh. But it has also created more than 24 other ventures.
Whether non-profit or for-profit, our involvement relates to benefiting to the poor people.
Muhammad Yunus, Grameen Bank's founder, describes why and how Grameen has launched enterprises in areas as diverse as textiles, cell phone technology, and healthcare. He shares the valuable lessons he has learned in finding new ways to give Grameen's members even greater access to opportunity and power.
We need a very different structure, different framework, different reference points. We would be judged by our own achievements.
Dr. Yunus sees a global need for a new kind of capitalism, one that puts people in need first. He demonstrates how economic viability can magnify the impact of social ventures. And he describes the support systems needed to allow this new model of capitalism to reach its vast potential.
Since capitalism is narrowly interpreted, socially conscious people don't want to get involved in business because that's uninteresting for them. That's not what we want. We don't want to make money. We want to do something else. So they are outside the business purview. I'm saying if you open it up, a lot of people will gradually come in, particularly young people who are looking for things to do in the world, contribute in the world, and solve problems of the world. They will dream of becoming a social business entrepreneurs, and the facilities has to be created so that they become social business entrepreneur. And I'm talking about even creating departments. There are business schools producing MBAs. There will be a social business program in the business school which will be creating social MBAs. And then you need another institution to make it happen, like you have the stock markets. And the existing stock market, people go there to make more money, as simple as that. You don't go there for charity. So if I want to do good to people in a business way, I have nowhere to go. So I said, why don't we create a completely separate stock exchange where all the companies who are doing good to people, the social business enterprises, will be listed. It could be women's empowerment, it could be street children, it could be drinking water, it could be arsenic problem in some place, it could be pollution problem in another place, it could be healthcare program in some place, it could be health insurance for poor people, whatever. There's 101 and 1001 ideas that you can bring and run those things in a business way, provided the investors who would like, I cannot run a company like that, but I would like to invest in one. I have the money and I can spend it. If we have to run a social business enterprise right now, we run into a lot of problems because we have not set up supportive institutions alongside. So we would be depending a lot more on the old institutions, and they will be at each stage questioning our norms, they will not understand our performance yardsticks and so on. If we are not making profit, why should I come and support you? Why should I lend money to you? You are not making any profit. How are you going to pay us back? But doesn't mean that you have to be out of the market completely. It means that you are the first one to venture into new territory and you lead the way and others will follow you and create institutions. This is how the pioneers always did. Be the first one, stick the neck out and make it happen. Luckily, already if you look around the world, there are many, many, more than we can think, are social business entrepreneurs. So there will be initial problems, but if it sticks, if it grows, you can create your own world.
An explosion in innovation has created a global economy that has benefited millions of people. But many others have suffered with no governance structure in place to protect the public good.
Global governance right now is tilted towards the interests of the powerful and rich. And therefore a way has to be found to give a voice to the billions and billions of people who live without proper resources.
Peter Eigen is the founder of Transparency International, a global organization that has successfully strengthened global governance in the area of corruption. In this program, he explains how a powerful civil society can help build an enabling environment in which global governance can flourish.
It is amazing how important civil society organizations have been in the changes which occurred in the world during the last 15-20 years.
He describes how members of civil society can work together and in partnership with the business community, governments, and academia to create a better world for everyone.
Global governance has to be more responsive to the interests of the poor. Global governance right now is tilted towards the interests of the powerful and rich, and therefore a way has to be found to give a voice to the billions and billions of people who live without proper resources. The way one can do this is only by giving a stronger say to the representatives of these people, and as long as, for instance, their governments are themselves corrupt and don't have compassion for their own poor people, as we very often see by the tremendous wealth which is amassed by the governments and politicians in very poor countries. There has to be some other way, and I believe that this is the area where civil society organizations have a tremendous responsibility. Well, civil society organizations have to, of course, live up to this new responsibility. They have to, in my opinion, become much more competent to understand the complexities of the area in which they want to take on responsibilities. This is why, for instance, I believe strongly our universities have to help to train and educate more leaders for civil society. and research and so on has to focus more on the questions which are posed by civil society. But civil society leaders themselves have to be much more open to interact and formulate questions, for instance, to academia to get their support. Civil society also has to be much more open to cooperate with the traditional actors of governance. So they should not be too one-sided in, for instance, condemning the World Bank, condemning major multinational corporations. They should rather try to understand their interests and their strengths and cater to these interests and strengths in order to form compromises which will lead to change. Civil society organizations, of course, have to also work on their own integrity and their own transparency. They have to work on their own decision-making processes, which have to be participatory and have to be open. So in a way, civil society organizations in the final analysis have to stand the competition which they have for ideas and for interests, and have to make it in a market of good ideas. I mean, this is eventually the source of their legitimacy. And in that sense, basically it's the rule of the market which also decides whether a certain civil society organization with its particular ideas and its approaches will have impact or not.
Is a better world possible? The challenges sometimes seem overwhelming. Billions of people have no access to education, health care, clean drinking water, or even basic human rights. Their poverty is compounded by corruption, conflict over resources, economic stagnation, and violence.
Some countries, whole generations of young people are being lost.
So the cycle goes on and on. So one has to break that cycle.
Where are the solutions? And who are the change makers who can create them? In the past few decades, a powerful force has emerged. New leaders finding new ways to tackle the world's biggest problems. Problems that governments and businesses alone have not been able to overcome.
This is a new language, a new way of looking at the world.
Very different structure, different framework, different reference points.
This global revolution is led by social entrepreneurs, innovative people who respond to local problems, engage their communities in solving them, and accelerate change.
What has happened during the last 5 years is breathtaking.
People have the power of transformation.
This series is an opportunity to learn from the most extraordinary social entrepreneurs, people whose visionary ideas and persistence have enabled millions to transform their own lives. These founding members of Ashoka's Global Academy for Social Entrepreneurship have lessons to offer us all about the power of our own potential. They all started small, from humble beginnings. You are invited to share their journeys, learn their insights, and about the tools they use to produce change.
We have a window of opportunity of a couple of years.
It's a chance that we have to think ahead.
The companies that get this are going to have a huge competitive advantage.
Whether you're in business, the media, government, universities, or the social sector, this series will expose you to a new way of thinking and working that will stretch your own beliefs about what's possible and how you can achieve it.